coming out. This room is packed, as you can already see. There's so many things that many of you could have been doing today at 12 o'clock. There's infinite places you could have been. But for some reason, you were either interested about this topic, a teacher pressured you to be here, or something else caused you to be in this room right now. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. I hope whatever you learn about today is informative to you, and I hope it addresses some questions or concerns maybe that you've had in wondering about why one school has done so well or why another school has done so poorly. The reason that I took on this project is currently I'm a student working on my PhD, and I'm in an urban education program. And in my education program, we take all these different classes. And in one course, it was a history course. And we learned about the history of New York City schools. And there were all these issues that were going on in New York City schools, such as fight over segregation issues. There were fights over local control. There were mismanagement of certain situations. There were issues with the Board of Education. And when I saw all these different issues in the class that I was taking, I noticed that there were a lot of parallels going on with Poughkeepsie. And a lot of the issues that were happening in the larger urban district of New York City were also taking place in the smaller urban district of Poughkeepsie. And being that I'm from Poughkeepsie, I'm a Poughkeepsie High School graduate, I'm a Justice Community College graduate, these issues matter to me. I still do a lot in my community to this day. And so I wanted to learn more about my city and why things aren't going better for us academically. And then what I want to do is juxtapose our city with the district that's right next to us, which is Poughkeepsie, and talk about why things are going so much better in that district. So that's kind of what everything's about today. Once again, thank you for all for coming out. You can get started. So what I want to do in the beginning is I want to talk about Poughkeepsie, and I want to talk about just how we came about and why we actually have Poughkeepsie before I actually get into the divide. So Poughkeepsie originated in the 1600s with Yankee origins. The Hudson Valley developed a self-sufficient economy around agriculture, river, and canal-based shipping, as well as industry. In particular, the city of Poughkeepsie benefited especially by achieving a status as the region's largest city by the colonial period, with 4 other cities, which are still large in this area today: Beacon, Hudson, Kingston, and Newburgh. All these cities were built around similar industrialized riverfronts. The education system mirrored that of much of the northeastern U.S. There were several municipalities which shared school facilities. This was a popular practice at this point in time. However, the practice of being a self-sufficient economy and sharing school facilities would erode with the arrival of IBM in the Valley in the 1940s. Unfortunately, Poughkeepsie was already starting to get a bad reputation nationally by the time that IBM arrived in the 1940s. For example, in the 1940s, we have an area description security map, which I'm going to show you a little later on in this presentation, that's going to reveal that 51% of Poughkeepsie was already considered definitely declining or hazardous already in the 1940s. So there were issues before the schools even consolidated with perception problems about Poughkeepsie. And I kind of want to talk about what these perception problems did, because when I created this presentation and when I started writing my project, my idea at the time was that there was this whole mass movement of white flight that took place in Poughkeepsie. And there were a whole bunch of white individuals that didn't want the racial diversity that was taking place in the city, and they wanted to separate themselves from it. With that said, that's not as accurate as I thought originally. And a lot of the issues that came about with Poughkeepsie really go on this idea of zoning and mapping that took place way back in the 1800s. Can you click on the map for me, please? So this is a zoning map of Poughkeepsie in 1887. And if you notice, Poughkeepsie is a really small area. You see all the areas of Poughkeepsie are highlighted by various colors. These colors aren't necessarily so important, but what they show you is where the lines of the city of Poughkeepsie were drawn. And at that point in time, what was done is the expansion in the city of Poughkeepsie was limited. The city could no longer grow at that point in time because the ways in which the town lines were drawn, nobody ever renegotiated those town lines to increase the size of Poughkeepsie. So Poughkeepsie was really hindered already in the late 1800s at that point in time. Several years after IBM opened its Poughkeepsie plant, the New York State Education Department published a master plan calling for consolidation of the Spack-and-Kill Union Free School District and the Poughkeepsie City School District. Union Free School Districts were established by the state legislature in 1853, with the idea that 2 or more would join together to provide a high school program. Many of the early Union Free districts had boundaries that overlapped and were close to the boundaries of the village or city, as is the case with Spack-and-Kill in the city of Poughkeepsie. Moreover, there's another map that I'll be showing you a little later the same map that I referred to earlier, that indicated that some of the city of Poughkeepsie neighborhoods were more than 50% Italian and also had a large influx of black populations. In other words, this chart suggests that the changing ethnic and racial demographics were problematic for Poughkeepsie, especially for new residents. So now, I talked to you earlier about this idea of white flight wasn't quite what was happening. However, since there was such a diverse demographic population in Poughkeepsie and it was becoming increasingly diverse, what I do suggest is that there were a lot of persons who weren't accustomed to that diversity in their lives and didn't want exposure to it at that point in time. They chose homogenous communities purposefully to avoid racial segregation. Even currently in the U.S., when neighborhoods are considered poor or disadvantaged in a tangible way, research has shown that where children live matters deeply and whether they prosper as adults. In other words, conditions were already being created and perpetuated by the influx of second and third generation Italian immigrants and black migrants from the South. Neighborhoods, and particularly wards, were important to redistricting politics. The 8th Ward is salient to the shaping of the region in Spackville High School. Much of the city of Poughkeepsie was developed in the early 20th century. The decision not to expand boundaries beyond the annexation of the 8th Ward in 1928 meant that any new major development would have to take place in the town rather than the city. So that's part of the reason this expansion took place so rapidly in the town. As part of it is because IBM came to the area in the 1940s, and we go on to the next slide. IBM came in the 1940s, but also in 1928, Poughkeepsie was limited at the 8th Ward. And so if there was any expansion that was going to go on in Poughkeepsie, it had to take place in the town and not in the city or other surrounding areas. All right, so IBM comes into the area in the 1940s. Actually, what I want to do is I want to take a moment and I want to show you a video real quick. So click on the lower right-hand corner and run the video. We're going to start with 145.
Yeah, arrived in the Hudson Valley during the war, actually, when President Roosevelt suggested strongly to Thomas Watson, the head of IBM, that the company get involved in the war effort. And Roosevelt also, we believe, put pressure on people to locate in the Hudson Valley, where he was from. Accordingly, Mr. Watson opened up a factory building in Poughkeepsie to make armaments, rifles, and other things. And they expanded to other buildings. And then they continued to expand, and they started opening these research laboratories around Poughkeepsie. And we believe that these research laboratories led to them to say, let's keep on going and to go across the river to Kingston. We also feel that this was part of a whole effort during this period to move out of cities, what one scholar calls pastoral capitalism. The feeling was that our enemies would first strike cities, and best to move outside of cities to other locations. But it was also a time when they wanted to have horizontal manufacturing. In fact, if you look here, it was the boys' farm.
So as you just heard, IBM originally came to the area, and there were pressures actually from the president at the point in time. They wanted to buoy and support local war efforts for World War II. So now, in the 40s and 50s, all students who resided in both the town and the city of Poughkeepsie actually attended the Poughkeepsie City School District. However, the populations of local municipalities at that point in time were rapidly changing. IBM was the catalyst behind this change. IBM came to the area a decade earlier. In 1941, the Munitions Manufacturing Company, a newly created subsidiary of the internal business machine known as IBM Corporation, acquired 215 acres in the town of Poughkeepsie. By 1943, the parent company absorbed its subsidiary, and IBM Poughkeepsie won an Army-Navy Award for Excellence in Manufacturing for the war. This created many job opportunities for persons in this area. More than just providing job opportunities, the IBM Corporation provided significantly more attractive job opportunities and benefit packages than were offered at the time by competing employers. Continuing growth after the war made IBM Dutchess County's largest employer by far. Its generous benefits and paternalism made IBM the envy of other businesses and their employees and lifted the economic status of the valley. Not only IBM buoyed the economic status of the valley, it also contributed to furthering the economic divide between the poor and affluent classes, as it almost single-handedly developed and employed an affluent white middle class that previously didn't exist in the area. The carving out of the suburban Spatkill School District in the 50s so that IBM workers could have their own school system put an important dent in the city's base of middle-class students. Before denting the city's middle-class base, IBM's location had shaped the growth of the city, in addition to the city lines having previously been drawn so that there was no room for city expansion. New IBM employees, started relocating in areas closer to IBM plants and outside the city of Poughkeepsie, and this led to a loss of population in the city and growing in the surrounding municipalities. The loss of the city can be seen both in the population and manufacturing workforce change over the same 2 decades. Poughkeepsie had reached its peak population in the year of 1950 with a little over 41,000 residents. But by the year 1960, the population of Poughkeepsie City dropped to only 38,000 residents. In that same decade, the town of Poughkeepsie grew from only having roughly 18,000 residents to over 31,000 residents. A parallel shift in manufacturing employment, not including professional workers, saw a job loss in the city. In sharp contrast, the category of white-collar workers in the town soared. And then, more than just losing residents, the city began losing jobs and tax-paying residents in the 50s. The loss of residents of Poughkeepsie and the influx of new IBMers to surrounding municipalities kept segregation intact in Dutchess County, for there was little to no racial diversity outside the city of Poughkeepsie. So what I want to do right now is I want to take some time and I want to highlight a map. These maps that I was alluding to earlier, so click off. And let's go to the map in quality. So earlier I was talking to you about what was going on in Poughkeepsie in the 1940s and how everything was zoned in Poughkeepsie. So as you can see, there's different categories of the map. What's listed in green are considered the best neighborhoods in Poughkeepsie. What's listed in blue are still desirable neighborhoods. Yellow are definitely declining neighborhoods. And D are hazardous neighborhoods. Earlier, I referenced that over 51% of the neighborhoods in Poughkeepsie were either definitely declining or hazardous, which was extremely problematic, and it kind of spoke to the idea that individuals didn't want to move to the area. And when IBM was in the town and was expanding, individuals chose not to move to the city of Poughkeepsie and chose to move to surrounding areas. All right. And schools across the nation, the 1960s ushered in an era of attempted desegregation, strategized segregation, and the fight for local control of schools, which contributed to both segregation and desegregation. For the Spatkill School District, this fight for local control manifested in the desire to separate from Poughkeepsie City School District to create its own district. According to Harvey Fladd, Spatkill residents in the late 1960s organized a campaign to create their own school district so that their teenagers would not have to attend Poughkeepsie High School. The split was in part desired by Spatkill residents because the city of Poughkeepsie had begun to supposedly deteriorate. The town's growth has resulted in corresponding attrition of land values and population loss, which has contributed to over a number of years to the deterioration of the city of Poughkeepsie. One way in which the academic deterioration of the city of Poughkeepsie School District was manifesting was in fact that the neighborhoods were becoming overcrowded, to the dismay of the district petitioners. The organizers complained that the city facility had become too overcrowded, with a corresponding lowering of academic standards. So there was this idea of this fight for local control. And on one side, individuals who live in the Spatkill district were saying the interests of our communities are disparate at this point in time. They're divergent. And what was going on is they were pointing at the overcrowding classrooms that were taking place in Poughkeepsie and the lowering academic standards, and were arguing that it's not fair to expose our students to these settings and environments, and we should be able to have our own environments where we can raise the standards. However, the organizers' arguments may not have been as forthright as articulated, for Brown versus the Board of Education was recently passed in 1953. Thus, schools were supposedly being desegregated at the time. However, with the increasing racial tensions that were persisting nationally with the integration of schools, race was more than likely another factor motivating the creation of a new school district, especially considering that the preceding 2 decades had seen a large influx into the city of new black residents from the American South. So it's hard for citizens not to wonder about the racial dimensions of the Spatkill School District's campaign. So, as I told you earlier, I don't think race was the sole reason of the divide, but I do think race is a major factor in the divide. Race had to at least be a factor in the decision to create a new school district, especially considering that racial demographics changed dramatically from 1950 to 1980 in the region. For example, where the city's population was 96% white and only 4% non-white in 1950, Its demographic composition in 1980 had changed to 74% white and 26% non-white over those same 3 decades. This constituted a loss of 17,000 white residents and corresponded with an increase of 6,000 non-white residents into the city. This shift from overwhelmingly white to then just majority white had to be a difficult demographic transition for some members of different groups involved, especially with the social pressures added from the passing of Brown versus the Board of Ed. As the decade progressed, the segregation of black and white students became an issue of concern. The NAACP organization raised questions about segregation in elementary schools. Moreover, racial discrimination suits were filed against the board. Although in 1963, the superintendent assured that the state education department that the schools were not racially segregated. But by 1964, the district acknowledged that racial imbalances existed and began to plan for district-wide redesign. These changes contributed to hostilities, such as classes in 2 schools. In Poughkeepsie, classes in Poughkeepsie were canceled because teacher manned picket lines and had a dispute over discipline and teacher and pupil safety. So there was all this mixing that was going on in Poughkeepsie, and teachers were uncomfortable. Some teachers were in the community and were uncomfortable with this influx of diversity that was taking place in the schools. And it was a challenging dynamic because I can only imagine what the world was like in the 1940s and 50s. And if areas are homogenous and then they're being exposed to new communities and groups who have different ontologies and epistemologies, it's hard to incorporate these things into people's given ways of lives. For example, something that's happening temporarily in this moment is there's an influx of a lot of Latin-speaking students a lot of Spanish-speaking students that are coming in from different parts of the world, in general, and from Central America. And what's going on is individuals in school settings are having a difficult time figuring out how do we educate these children who come from different backgrounds than our own. And while educational goals may be similar across different communities, how to execute those goals is something that's often a challenge amongst communities. So what I'd like to do is go to the next slide. All right. So there was mixed feelings about this divide and the split that was taking place because some people were advocates of it and were really in support of the divide, and other people, no, they wanted to keep the communities combined. Local residents have mixed feelings about whether or not the schools should consolidate. Not all town of Poughkeepsie Spack-and-Kill residents were in favor of the new school creation. For example, Kenneth Parker, who was the son of a Methodist minister, he told the group, if we build our own high school, all we're doing is creating a middle-class ghetto high school. I see no other word for it than racism with the result of leaving Poughkeepsie to rot. Parker's statements makes apparent the racial dynamics at play in the decision to create a new school district. This statement makes it plausible that most, if not all parties involved were aware of the potential and even likely ramifications of the decision to create a new school district. In other words, what I'm suggesting in that moment is there were more resources in the Spack-and-Kill school district, and individuals who are advocating for their own school district in Spack-and-Kill were acutely aware of that at that point in time. And they were aware if they were able to create their own school district, that Poughkeepsie was going to have less resources, in part as a direct result of that decision. So just want to make sure individuals were aware. In addition, despite the hostilities, the Poughkeepsie School Board still wanted one consolidated district. Poughkeepsie School Board of Education, seemingly a minor player in the struggle, favored consolidation. In November of '67, the local paper quoted the city school board president quoting plans to build a high school in Spack-and-Kill, an unnecessary and unwarranted expenditure of state and local funds. So the people, many people in Poughkeepsie, especially people at the board at that point in time, felt that if we keep these schools together, it's actually going to bully all our communities as opposed to just bullying one community. Go on to the next slide. Thank you kindly. And actually, one more. Thank you. All right. The Poughkeepsie School Board was aware of all the resources that would be losing if the town's financial and school allocations were no longer being allocated to the city of Poughkeepsie. This is because IBM is not located in the city of Poughkeepsie, thus not directly benefiting Poughkeepsie's tax base if there was to be a new school created in the town. As we all know, IBM is directly located in the town of Poughkeepsie. This sentiment of losing resources was echoed by local clergymen who resided in the town who put out a joint statement. Instead of expressing concern for only our suburban educational needs, we should be prepared to share our leadership and resources to help meet the educational needs of the entire area. We see far too many frightening signs that we in the Poughkeepsie area are rushing headlong toward that disaster of becoming two societies, one black and one white. In effect, Spack-and-Kill seeks to remain very separate, largely white and increasingly unequal. This statement further highlights that the entire area's educational needs were not being met. Furthermore, the splitting of the two districts would only further the resource and educational divides. Not only are resources and academics an issue, but maybe more importantly, the lack of egalitarianism and outright racism is the other issue that the clergymen attempted to get the region to confront. Unfortunately, local efforts were to no avail. So now, this is what I want to say. So now in the 70s, the split actually takes place. The split between the two districts finally took place in the 1970s. While there were a number of contributing factors, the primarily white district's use of litigious tactics were the catalyst behind the eventual split. In the Spackenkill split case, parents of the largely white and relatively wealthy district located in the town, but not the city of Poughkeepsie, saw court support for a plan to keep their older students out of the city high school, and arguably to ensure that they would benefit from the tax revenues from a nearby IBM plant. Ironically, this is following the overturning of the Plessy Doctrine of separate but equal in 1953 in the Brown versus Board of Ed. This distinctly disparate histories of the two districts provide anecdotal evidence that separate rarely, if ever, amounts to being equal. This new middle class was not a proponent of integration, and it wanted its own school district as the community felt its needs differed radically from those of the Poughkeepsie city residents. Spacknkill's resistance to a united school district was a multi-layered approach. Spackenkill School Board hired outside attorneys to take its fight with the state education department into the state courts, had friends in the state legislature push bills favorable to its agenda, and consistently framing its case in a rhetoric of excellence aligned with local control and independence. Something that somebody helped make me aware of and I found really, really interesting is that actually the current mayor of the city of Poughkeepsie, Rob Rollison, is actually one of the members of one of the first graduating classes of Spackenkill. And his father was actually really instrumental in helping Spackenkill create its own district. And that was something that was extremely revelatory to me. And I find it somewhat interesting to me that our mayor went to a different school district, and I'm just curious about like how that impacted his decision into becoming our mayor and what some of his aims or goals are. All right. The hiring of the outside attorneys speaks to the affluence in the district of Spackenkill, and it kind of highlights some of the lack of resources in Poughkeepsie. IBM created an affluent white middle class that had economic resources and racial privileges that many of the city of Poughkeepsie residents just didn't possess.
Jordan, could you
Yes.
speak up a little bit? It's difficult to hear you there.
Not a problem. Not a problem. Throughout IBM's history of employing IBMers, it has excluded certain groups such as blacks from most of its hiring practices, especially prior to the later 20th century. In domestic recruiting in the early years of the Valley, IBM seems to not have hired local African Americans. With blacks not receiving the same enviable employment opportunities as other white groups, they were also not being exposed to the educational opportunities IBM had to offer. Thus, IBM was retraining its white workers, often Italian immigrants, second and third generation male descendants of Poughkeepsie immigrants from Southern and Central Europe. And it wasn't providing the same opportunities to black individuals. And so when I talk about this racial homogeneity that was taking place, IBM contributed to it, whether it was purposeful or not, doesn't change the fact that IBM was a catalyst in this whole divide that took place. Stay here for one more. No, let's go to the next slide. Let's go to the next slide. So now, oh, no, come back, I'm sorry. The split still occurred, so. To further academic disparities between the two districts, Spackenkill not only created its own district that removed valuable resources from Poughkeepsie, but Spackenkill also came and hired Poughkeepsie's best educators. Upon Spackenkill High School's creation in the 1973-1974 school year, the fledgling school district further sabotaged Poughkeepsie City Schools by hiring many of Poughkeepsie's most experienced teachers. In other words, Spackenkill removed economic and educational resources for its own gain to the detriment of the Poughkeepsie district. How is Poughkeepsie to overcome such deficits and impediments with limited financial and academic support? In conjunction with IBM, the Spackenkill School District stymied Poughkeepsie's income and academic levels. By the early 1970s, the higher proportion of professional and managerial workers in the parts of the town of Poughkeepsie and in other townships where IBM was concentrated resulted in lower income and education levels in the city of Poughkeepsie and surrounding areas with fewer opportunities for Poughkeepsians. All right, so now I want to move forward, and I want to start to talk about the effects of the split. And so the effects of the splits for me kind of started in the 1980s. Since moving to the Hudson Valley, IBM has always had a major influence on the local economy. Some would even suggest that the entire local economy hinged upon IBM. Unfortunately, IBM's corporate success wasn't infinite. So during the 80s when IBM started to experience a shift and their business wasn't necessarily as popular as it once was up to that point in time in the 20th century. There was an IBM culture shift that started to take place. In between the 1985 and 1993, IBM eliminated some 17,000 positions in the Hudson Valley and shut down its Kingston facility in 1994. Once IBM was no longer blowing the valley economically, many other prominent employers left as well, for their business models couldn't sustain. Something else that occurred during that point in time was there was the closure of state psychiatric hospitals. And we had all these psychiatric hospitals, and we had a psychiatric hospital in the area. But unfortunately, our Hudson River Psychiatric Center here, and when they closed it down, many individuals ended up homeless downtown where there were other individuals in Poughkeepsie, but it was uncomfortable for individuals who want to come into Poughkeepsie because with the increased homeless population, individuals who weren't familiar with the area felt uncomfortable being exposed to that population. Sadly, when the Hudson River State Hospital closed in the 90s, Poughkeepsie suffered the effects of a poor preparation plan, maybe even a plan of abuse for a person being released from the facilities. Many persons were being released in said facilities for good reason. They had mental health issues and many people were actually being released from these facilities were actually in them for good reasons. Some of them had mental health issues and needed proper support. In the state's failing to support the patients and employees of Hudson River State Hospital, Poughkeepsie declined into a further tailspin. This phenomenon negatively impacted Poughkeepsie's economics, as already stretched thin budgets and resources need to be tapped into to aid the new, differently able city residents. The effects of the schools in the 90s had impacted our schools. The academic impact manifested in the form of immigration and the newly immigrated students entering the new school system. Hudson Valley also became what researchers called a new immigration destination for Mexican and Latin immigrants. These newcomers did not diffuse across the region. Cities of Newburgh and Poughkeepsie was where the residents grew and not in the surrounding areas. The influx of Spanish-speaking immigrants hurt Poughkeepsie's test scores, as test taking a second language is challenging for many non-English speakers, especially if some students are just learning the language. The influx of Mexican immigrants, many from Oaxaca, further contributes to the economic and racial divide that still exists today between this town and city of Poughkeepsie. So another thing that I want to talk about is this idea of our schooling systems at that point in time. Because while this split happened, the schools weren't, there wasn't such a divide as there is now, where there's over a 30 percentage point difference of graduation rates of Spakenkill compared to those of Poughkeepsie. At one point in time, while they weren't necessarily parallel, they much more closely aligned. And what was going on at that point in time in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s city of Poughkeepsie, we had magnet schools, and magnet schools were being federally funded. And magnet schools provided a lot of support and a lot of different programs to schools in the area. For example, Smith School, which is a local elementary school, literally had a parent room, and there were different opportunities and support systems for parents to become more engaged with their children's educational outcomes. And they got to become more engaged with educators and more engaged with the whole academic process as a whole. And then what happened is, in the early 2000s, that funding for magnet schools stopped coming federally. And unfortunately, at that point in time, we can actually look at Poughkeepsie's graduation rates, and the decline becomes steeper and steeper after that point in time. Something else I want to discuss, though, is this idea of mismanagement. Because Spakenkill school is a blue ribbon district, but unfortunately, Poughkeepsie has schools that are in receivership. That's highly problematic, especially considering these districts are right next to one another. With that said, there was a lot of mismanagement that was taking place in Poughkeepsie. And the reason I want to focus on this idea of mismanagement, because I'm scared so far that I've been framing this as a black is bad, white is good situation. And that's by no means how I really want to frame this. And I want to talk about this idea that while Poughkeepsie at certain points in time may not have had the same resources, that hasn't always been the case. Because as many of us know, there's a high percentage of students in Poughkeepsie who get free or reduced lunch. And as a result of having a high percentage of students who get free or reduced lunch, we get additional federal funding. So when we get this additional federal funding, a lot of our funding levels and amounts actually are very similar to the amounts that they're in Spakenkill. So if we have similar funding levels, you would ask, then what's the problem? And that's what happens. There was a lot of mismanagement of funds. So, back in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a superintendent in Poughkeepsie. His name was Alfred Duffy. If anybody's aware of Alfred Duffy was a white superintendent in the area, and unfortunately, he actually got sent to prison. The reason he got sent to prison was he was mismanaging funds. There's stories out there of him misappropriating funds, paying people who weren't supposed to be paid, paying himself when he wasn't supposed to be paid. In addition to that, there's also rumors and stories, and I couldn't confirm it, but I've heard it from more than one location, that he literally took our funds, taxpayer funds, to pave his own driveway at his house. So these were the type of abuses that were taking place in the city of Poughkeepsie that weren't necessarily taking place in Spackleton. Something else that was going on in Poughkeepsie was this idea of nepotism and other things were happening. So let me start to highlight some other differences. So now, there were controversies with some of Poughkeepsie's leadership. For example, in the early 2000s, Robert Watson was the district superintendent from 2000 to 2006. During his tenure, he was charged with misappropriating more than $1 million in public funds. However, all of Robert Watson's charges were dismissed, and actually later on, not only did he just dismiss all his charges, and that's unheard of for somebody to go in and be charged with 6+ felonies and be convicted of nothing, and everything be dismissed. With that said, he actually, and it just got dismissed a couple years ago by United States Supreme Court, he actually placed a $100 million lawsuit against the local school district because, yeah, he wasn't pleased with what happened, and like it affected his career because there was this image of impropriety, and there wasn't impropriety on his part. And if there was impropriety, it should have been proven in court. But there was discovery, and there were other processes, and the fact that none of it came to fruition kind of suggests that either he was really, really good at hiding stuff, or there was no impropriety. And now, contemporarily, right now, 2010 and beyond, the schools are performing on opposite ends of the educational spectrum. With little to no room for belief that Poughkeepsie City schools are performing anywhere near acceptable standards of graduation rates. Other alternatives have been proposed locally in the form of charter schools. Charter schools have been highly debated as to the benefits of the community, but the type of charter school and how it's introduced to the community are other factors to consider. Personally, I'm not a big fan of charter schools. I feel like they remove funds and resources from communities who often desperately need them. And oftentimes, charter schools have these selective processes in how they go about choosing their students. So when they boast certain high success rates, well, of course they have high success rates when they're cherry picking the people that go to their institutions. And another issue preventing city Poughkeepsie schools from receiving more funding is the state-imposed property tax cap. Under the tax cap, school districts may not increase their tax levy by more than the rate of inflation, which is roughly around 2%, whichever is less, plus an allowance of certain increases in pension costs, court actions, and local capital costs. Apologize. The cap is especially restricted for low property wealth districts such as Poughkeepsie that are significantly limited in the amount of revenue that they can raise with each percentage point increasing in the levy. This means Poughkeepsie ends up a two-time loser. First of all, the tax cap prevents the district from obtaining more financial support locally. And then, also as we know, usually people care about where their money is being spent. So thus, more person may be invested in the well-being of Poughkeepsie City schools if they actually had to spend more of their money and more of their income on the schools. So if more of my money was going to these taxes in Poughkeepsie, maybe I would care more about what was happening in Poughkeepsie. So the last thing that I want to talk about before I actually open up the floor and start to talk about other possibilities, don't switch it yet, is this idea of nepotism, because nepotism is a problem in the mismanagement that's been going on in Poughkeepsie. So leadership problems and controversies continue in Poughkeepsie. And one form in which they manifested was nepotism. During the most recent 2017 school board election, longtime trustee Ralph Coates, who was also the board president, and Greg Charter lost their seats to Doreen Clifford and Deborah Long in the May 16 election. Many local residents and school district employees were disappointed in the way in which new hires came about. In part because the heated school board election was followed by a quick succession of long-term employment decisions, some of which have been called into question by new trustees and residents. And also, the problems weren't also with the board members, but they're also with our superintendent, Nicole Williams, Poughkeepsie's current local board felt that Williams had failed to perform her duties in a manner that is appropriate or beneficial to students, and had engaged in numerous acts of misconduct and incompetence that have harmed the district. Certain terms of her contract prevent the school board from firing or holding her accountable. One act of misconduct that the board was concerned about was the changing of grades to improve graduation rates. An investigation by the council by Special Counsel Todd Aldinger into potentially improper 2017 graduation raised concerns that Williams was either derelict in performing her duties or complicit in the improprieties identified. So, unfortunately, we go to the next page. I've outlined a lot of issues and problems that have occurred, and as I told you in the beginning of this presentation, I'm from Poughkeepsie. So I spend most of my time focusing on Poughkeepsie and what has caused Poughkeepsie to not succeed or excel. And I haven't spent nearly as much time on focusing on Spack-and-Kill and what's caused Spack-and-Kill to do so well. With that said, this is the point in time that I really want to open it up to the floor. We have about 15 or so minutes left, and there's a lot of people here today, and I have so many things that I want to talk about. And when I open it up to the floor, I don't want to just talk about problems, though. I'd also like to talk about potential solutions and possibilities. And I want to make sure that I haven't framed this as a deficit model for Poughkeepsie residents. And I kind of want to shift this idea and think of it as a possibilities model. And what can we do to create effective change in our cities and communities? And that's kind of how I want to reframe this and how I was thinking about this. Yes, sir.
Hi, Professor. I'm Mark Belanti. I'm a city resident for the last 12 years. Full disclosure, I'm the current superintendent of Spack-and-Kill.
Thanks so much.
I want to thank you. You did a lot of work, and I really appreciate all the effort that you put into this presentation. I want to clarify one thing you said that could be misunderstood. Spack-and-Kill has been a district since 1866. Spack-and-Kill has been a school district since 1866. In 1912, it started sending students to neighboring schools for high school, Wappingers, Poughkeepsie. And you mentioned that there were a lot of reasons, I'm sure, and why they wanted to create their own high school. They never created a new district. They wanted to create a new high school. They were a K-8 district. And part of the reason, because you mentioned there were a number of reasons, and maybe there were racial reasons and a lot of other reasons, but part of it was growth and expansion. So in 1966, we sent 231 kids to Poughkeepsie High School, 260 the next year, 283 the following year, and 329. And so part of the reason they wanted to form their own high school, as we have today, was the reason you gave, overcrowding and wanting their own local control. In terms of moving forward, you mentioned something also very important, because as being a city resident, the success of Poughkeepsie City Schools is really important to me, whether I'm a superintendent of Spack-and-Kill or not. I volunteered for a while at Poughkeepsie City Schools while I retired as a superintendent, now I've been back. Governance, stability of leadership is really important in great leadership. I had many good friends who were outstanding principals in the city of Poughkeepsie at different times, including a gentleman named Ted Peterson. I can name 5 of them.
Yes.
Okay, Ted was a good friend of mine. We've had maybe 5 superintendents in the last 50 or 60 years in our district. I'm about the 5th. So governance, I personally believe that one of my best friends is Superintendent Savosnik. And they do a fantastic job. There is no reason that we can't have a really effective school district in the city of Poughkeepsie, but we have to get stability of leadership, both in the district level with the board and in the buildings, because hiring great principals makes all the difference in the world. And I'm certainly open to doing anything that I can as a local superintendent and working with the city, because we all have an interest. The prosperity of this region depends upon the prosperity of the city, and the educational level of all students, whether they go to Spack-and-Kill or Arlington or the city, are important in our future. So we all need to be working together on this. I just want to make sure that people realize there may have been a lot of factors in '70. I was just getting ready to graduate high school at that time, so I had no insight into what was going on there. But I think it was more complicated, as you realize. These are complicated things. They're not simple, just the issues of race.
Thank you so much.
Counterpoint. The state Senate debates on the
Identify yourself.
Josh Simons, I'm a senior research associate at the Benjamin Center, SUNY New Paltz. Actually just recently moved from the city of Poughkeepsie. The state Senate debates in the creation of the Spack-and-Kill High School and the expansion of the district to be K through 12 recognize the racial disparities that would be created by that. And in fact, to the degree that the state government threatened to withhold state aid, so long as the plan was going forward. To which the response of the people in Spack-and-Kill was, we don't need your state aid, we'll fund it ourselves. And largely because the Spack-and-Kill area at that point, the heads of household were about 95% white-collar workers, well paid from IBM. You know, so I mean, if the racial disparities are that stark that they're actually being debated on the floor of the New York State Senate, I think that it being ascribed to as a primary motivator is quite accurate. Not only that, but you can go back into the Poughkeepsie Journal archives for this, into the letters to the editor, and show very clear racial bias in the decision to move on.
Anyone else? Yes.
When you have an idea and solutions or approaches you might want to take, any thought given to reestablishing something like the YM and YWCA?
I mean, we're actually just putting ideas out there right now. I've heard there's been talks about that in the city of Poughkeepsie, but I'm not certain where that's actually leading to. Honestly, like, ideas that I've thought about is, I kind of put it somewhere on the board. I wondered, and mind you, I don't understand how these processes go about, and I don't understand, like, for example, legal requirements that are aligned with them. With that said, I don't understand why we can't do more shared collaboration projects between the two schools, have like shared senior projects. And what this does is, this shares in diversity, and more importantly than just sharing diversity, this shares in cultural capital. And now what it does is, it doesn't privilege one cultural capital over another. And that's something I think is really important about this idea. And if I'm correct, don't superintendents gather once monthly? And I was wondering potentially, like, maybe at those meetings, maybe there could be like more conversations about what can be done. I don't know what happens in those spaces, though. We do, Mark. I'm not in those spaces. And then something else I thought about is like PTAs. I've heard stories about, for example, at the middle school in Spack-and-Kill, there's a PTA meeting for the 6th grade, for the 7th grade, and the 8th grade. In Poughkeepsie, there's one PTA meeting. And we can talk about things that can be done to like get more parent support. And I know economics play into those issues because some parents are working at night and other issues, but what can be done to like bully the PTA in this area? And I wonder if there could be more collaboration between PTAs from different communities. Same thing with school boards and other things. Like, these are the ideas that I think about. I think about collaboration. It helps so many people. And with the glasses, they are little coming. Yep.
So I remember,
Can you stand up and speak really loud? Thank you so much.
I went to Spack-and-Kill, and we once, we did the UN collaboration, and I remember really enjoying that, and I thought, maybe if we did more things like that, more more things like that, that would be.
Definitely. I think that you just open up opportunities and possibilities.
I just don't know how to get that started.
Can you come back to me?
I sure can.
I'm a city of Poughkeepsie taxpayer and resident, and I want to ask Mr. Bell, did you have, if you recall from your high school days, did you have a theater program? And how was your music program? And how vibrant and expressive was your visual arts program? A way of boosting pride and diversity and creativity, and is that, to your knowledge, still existing in today's, the arts in the community?
Individuals who are currently in the school district can better answer that question. When I was in the school district, we definitely had all those programs. And I don't know how robust they were, but they definitely existed at that point in time.
My name is Bill Rubin. I live in the town of Poughkeepsie. For a number of years, I used to write a blog called Property Tax in Dutchess County. And what I found was that the tax rate in the Spack-and-Kill school district, the school tax rate, there's two kinds. There's homestead and non-homestead. And the non-homestead is for commercial properties like IBM. And the Spack-and-Kill school district property tax rate for non-homestead, for like IBM, is not only is it the highest in Dutchess County, the highest tax rate, but it's the highest by far. And I think that's something that should be worth looking at as a factor in basically contributes to the wealth of Spack-and-Kill and to its success.
Go.
All right. So you mentioned something about discriminatory action or something, right? you're relating the activity of the PTA, or what exactly are you trying to change, or are you trying to take action on?
Not necessarily discriminatory action. What I was highlighting was how there's a difference just most recently, like, and there's so much more support and so many more support systems in Spackenkill to highlight that there's a 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, but there's PTA meetings for each individual grade, which shows how involved parents are in that community.
So what are you
Conversely,
trying
though,
to change?
Poughkeepsie, we don't have as much involvement. For all our 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, we only have one meeting. And so what strategies can be taken from the Spackenkill community and then implemented in the Poughkeepsie community
So
we can have similar
Are
results?
the impacts like internationally, or just specifically Poughkeepsie?
I'm just focused on Poughkeepsie and Spackenkill right now with the highlight on Poughkeepsie.
So I've seen differences, right? Over here, like in New York City, Poughkeepsie, and even Nicaragua. I visited Nicaragua for like the school district over there. So like I taught them English. I taught these kids English. It was like a program. It's called Global Glimpse. The Global Glimpse program was pretty much an action on your leadership roles, and they teach you how to like monitor and train these individuals to I guess do something out of themselves, I guess you could say. Like I'm sorry to put it that way, but yeah. What does a PTA have to do, or what does a school district here
When
not have
parents
over
are
there?
involved with their
Like
children.
how can we include that to here? Like that's what I'm saying. Like,
So what I'm saying, when the parents are more directly involved in their children's academic success, children do better. And what I'm suggesting right now is there's not as many parents as active in Poughkeepsie as there are in Spackenkill. So what I'm trying to do is give them practices and strategies and the ways in which Spackenkill parents are successful in becoming involved in their children's lives. And I want us to mirror some of those strategies in Poughkeepsie so STAR students can have higher graduation rates, and we're not graduating school at 65% compared to Spackenkill graduating at like 97%.
But the graduation rate over there is different. Like in comparison to here, like graduation rate from there to here, like is 0%, like close to 0%.
But that's why I was telling you, I'm focused on Poughkeepsie and Spackenkill. These are the two districts that I'm comparing. I haven't chosen any other district. Spackenkill's around 97%, Poughkeepsie's in the mid-60s.
My name is Vanessa Diaz. I am a former graduate. I'm an alumni of Poughkeepsie City School District, class of '92. I'm also a parent of a graduate of the class of 2012. I am an aunt to numerous students in the district. In regards to this gentleman's question about the theater and visual arts program, when I was in school, those programs thrived, and they were very active. There was always a play that was headed by the late Sheila Morello. Right now, there are none of those programs in the district at all, and they want those programs to come back. But there is no money for those programs. All of the money is being shifted, and as a former district employee as well, a lot of those monies are being shifted towards testing. I understand testing must be done, but at the same time, these children and students need an outlet to, you know, they're not so bombarded with testing on a daily basis. They need to have an outlet, whether it be visual arts, whether it be computer programming, whatever. There needs to be an outlet for it. So yes, my sister is the PTA, and I'm definitely going to go back to her and be like, sis, maybe this is something. I don't have any kids in the district. I only have nieces and nephews. So I'm willing, you know, as a community resident, I'm willing to do anything to see the district that I graduated from thrive, because right now, as a former alumni, it breaks my heart to see the conditions of the school district that I prided myself in graduating from be in such a disarray. It's heartbreaking. I sat in the board meeting of 2016, and this former superintendent, she was so proud of the 64.5 graduation rate percentage. I sat there and I was embarrassed as an employee, as an alumni. I was embarrassed. I said, I can't believe that you're happy with this graduation rate when there's districts around us that are doing better than we are. What can we do to strengthen these graduation rates? Because right now, I'm not happy with it at all. But to sit there and listen to that as an employee and you know, as an alumni, it broke my heart because I was like, how can you be proud of that? I can't be proud of that. Something has to be done.
All right, so everyone, at this point in time, our time is winding down. With that said, classes continue at DCC at 1 o'clock. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not ending it yet. We have 2 more comments that I want to say my last day. But I want to let individuals know if for some reason you want to stay, if you want to continue this conversation, I'd love to. I'd love to. So my 2 comments, one in the back. Right.
Hi, my name's Matthew Bolivar. I'm a councilman from the town of Poughkeepsie. And the town has, over the years, has taken some kind of subtle steps to continue the divide, the economic and population divide between the city and the town. One of those has to do with Section 8 housing. The state and the federal government provide funding for Section 8 housing as long as you fulfill a quota of how much of that housing you have in your municipality. The town has chosen recently to cede that funding to the city of Poughkeepsie so that there is no Section 8 housing in the town. And they've done it really sneakily. There's actually a Section 8 link on the town's website that you can go to it, and it brings you right to, oh, look at this Section 8. But you don't realize when you click that link, it brings you to the city's webpage. They've been really subtle about it, and the more awareness we can raise about that, it's a really sneaky way to continue a divide.
My name is Lady Nato. I'm an assistant dean here for. I think, no, people don't like to talk about politics, but I'm here to talk about politics for a few minutes. I think that the politics of education, the politics of the money that goes toward education is just, it's so broken. We really need to get involved in politics. We really need to start electing people who are going to do what we need to do. This race to the top was a disaster. It was a disaster for Poughkeepsie and many other cities. If people could show that they were doing the right data analysis, and they could show that by their data that their students were doing this, that, or the other thing, they were getting funding, and schools that were not capable of doing that were losing funding, and Poughkeepsie just is a loser in this race to the top. And so we need to really think about that. Get involved. It's the only way.
The community action group, can you speak about that? I mean, there is a group that is trying to mobilize political support,
The
nonpartisan.
Dutchess County Progressive Action Alliance, and
Well, yes,
that's
but-
one of them.
Yeah, but community action is.
Oh, yeah. Community action, yeah.
All right, this is my last comment, and I'm going to close it.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Gully Stanford. I'm actually on the school district's Parent and Community Engagement Committee. So many people have talked about the importance of the arts in engaging and motivating our creative students and giving them those opportunities. In fact, this year, for the first time in years, the district approved a performing arts club. It's called Culture Shock, and it's being headed up by 2 social studies teachers in the middle school. The school district has just approved a study into restoring the lighting, sound, and production capability of the very rundown high school auditorium. We are putting together a community group of boosters to support the visual and performing arts in the Poughkeepsie City School Districts. I'll be here after the meeting. If anybody, Miss Vanessa, if we can talk, if anybody would want to sign up and be part of that, we are making some progress, and we have the written commitment of the interim superintendent to put more money into the arts in the coming year. So please join me. Let's make them an offer they can't refuse.
All right, so 2 things right now, 2 things. So, a lot of us in here, we want to become agents of change. A lot of us want to go out and change the world. Literally, we have dreams of becoming like Gandhi, Mother Teresa, MLK. The reality is that few, if any of us, are ever going to get those opportunities. But what's going to happen for every single last one of us is, we're going to get the opportunity to change someone's life. When you recognize you have that opportunity, please make sure you change that person's world for the better. Because too often we change person's lives for the worse. And then the other thing I want to leave you with is my life motto. Money comes and goes, but the way you treat someone lasts forever. So often, I don't remember money spent I remember how people treated me. I remember my interactions with people. And it's just something that's always resonated with me, and I just try to live by it every day. Once again, we can continue this conversation, but if you have somewhere to go, feel free to leave. Thank you so much for coming out. Thank you for